So we're going to talk a little bit more about using jQuery with Ajax because there are several methods that you can use. They're jQuery methods that make coding Ajax a little bit easier. So here is a JSON file. And you can see this is my standard Fred Flintstone and Barty Rubble example. And then here is the Jquery script that processes and displays that data. And so you can see the script is actually pretty short. So here we're using get.json. The name of the file is data.js. And then we have that anonymous function that is processing the response text that gets sent back from the server. So that response text we are calling data. And then we've got some output. You can see I've got the start of an unordered list here. And then I can do a for loop so that it goes through each. This is like a for each. So variable I in data.users is going to loop through each row, and then I'm adding a line, the first name from data.users, the last name, and the month they joined. Then I've got an end line. So that's what it's looping through. And then I'm going to output the closing unordered list, and then I update my page. So that is actually super short. And here it is live. Okay, so that is all it does. Gives me a little unordered list using this data. And then one thing I am going to point out, if you look here, we've got joined, and then we've basically got an object here. So we have a name value pair, object, which is why joined.month is how we have to retrieve April in this case and January up here. Okay, all the rest, it's just data.users, you're subscripting in, and you are grabbing the, or you're telling it to grab the data for first name or last name. A couple other things you can do with jQuery pretty easy is to do a little tabbed page like this. Not hard at all to do in jQuery, and this is an XML example. So this is my XML file. So this is where my heading is coming from. Okay, the captions, if you wanted to do something like this, these are the captions, so that's what you would want to change. And then you can see that we've got the content for each ID, and then this is where you'd want to put the content of the page. So the content of the page could be an iframe with a PDF in it, or whatever you want. Okay, this is actually kind of a nifty way of displaying things. This little table is listing some of the jQuery Ajax methods that you can use. And so I've taken some of the previous examples and kind of coded them up using jQuery so you can see how that would look. So Ajax, I think we saw this before, super easy to use. Here we've got our listener and event handler. And so if they click the button, we are using this Ajax method. All we have to do is give it the URL, check to see if it's successful, and if it is, we run a little anonymous function where the result here is the response text that gets sent from the server. And we're just taking that directly and updating the page. And then if you wanted to see this run, It's something that you guys have seen before, but I believe before we were looking at HTML and JavaScript. So here is that same example using get. Okay, so instead of Ajax, here now we're using get. So with get, you have to give it the name of the file, and then you still have an anonymous function where data is the response text, status is the status up from the server. And remember, the server goes through lots of different iterations before it is successful. So we're only concerned if it's successful, in which case we are going to update the page. Okay, if it's not successful, we can display an error. And then you can see this basically works the same way. So getJSON loads JSON encoded data from a server using HTTP GET. So this is a little different. With getJSON, we are still telling it the name of our file. We still have an anonymous function that is bringing in the data from the server. Okay? And we're still processing with a for loop. And we did look at this earlier. So far, we've pretty much focused on GET requests, but you can also use POST. The reason that we haven't looked at POST much is because that is more server-side scripting. We don't really do that in this class, but I did include some links in case you guys are curious, and also an example from the book. And load is another server side, loads data from the server, puts it into an element. This is more of a server side use because it is taking advantage of a callback function. So you've got a selector.load, you've got your URL, the data from the server, and what callback does is once you have the data and you are ready for processing, callback is the function that you are going to use to process the data. Okay, so here I've got div1.load, and all I'm giving it is a URL. Here I've got basically another URL. It's going to a specific ID on the page. But we are going to get into callbacks next week when we do API processing. And just a little issue with cross-domain requests. It used to allow this online, and now it does not. So that's why, to start with, we're kind of focusing on loading up files that are in our own domain. But if you want to access APIs and grab the data that they store, you are accessing outside of your domain. And that is where a callback function comes into play. So to do a callback, basically you have to put it in a script tag. You have to give it the source, and this would be whatever the API source is. Okay, and typically after the question mark, you have callback equal. Show events is your own function that you are going to process when the server retrieves the results. And you're going to learn a lot more about that next week because this is how you have to handle a cross-domain request, or this is how we are going to handle it. There are a couple other different ways you can create a proxy file. We are not going to do that in this class. We are going to use method 2. You can also add information to the HTTP header that will give you access to the resources that are on a different domain. They have a different origin. We're not going to do that technique either. So what we're going to be focusing on is the second one because it's effective and it works pretty well. And that is pretty much how the APIs want you to access their data. And you're going to be learning all about that next week. So for this week, focus is on how to use Ajax with XML and HTML files.